Good morning. So while thousands of wells have been drilled in states like Pennsylvania and Ohio that produce natural gas by means of shale extraction, numerous health and environmental groups have called on Governor Cuomo to ban hydraulic fracturing, or what's commonly referred to as fracking, in New York State. This is because the waste products produced by this process contain chemicals that pose great risks to human and environmental health. So what's New York attempting to do about this issue? And how can we help the Department of Environmental Conservation achieve better results? Well, my name is Fernando Arias. With the help of my dedicated team and the guidance of our faculty advisor, Steve Cohen, I'd like to present to you the High Volume Hydraulic Fracturing Waste Tracking Program, New York State Senate Bill 6892, which, if passed, would be New York State's first approach to answering some of these questions, and it'll commence the beginning of our simulation. So this morning, we will look at what waste is produced by hydraulic fracturing. How does this process look on the ground? What are the potential accidents? How is New York State planning to regulate this? And what are the necessary next steps forward so that we'll examine through this bill? So first, let me explain to you what hydraulic fracturing is and how its waste is generated. After a well that produces shale gas has been drilled, the fracking process starts with millions of gallons of water mixed with sand and some serious chemicals that produce the fracking fluid. These chemicals can cause long-term health problems, including cancer and respiratory problems. The fracking fluid is then pressurized and pumped down the wellbore, passing through various layers beneath the ground. Inside the well, the fluid sometimes passes through fresh water sources, and once inside of the shale formation, the fluid breaks the rock to release the natural gas. A portion of this fluid is then pumped back up to the surface, and at this time, the fracking fluid becomes flowback fluid, which is a polluting waste that must be contained in closed storage tanks. This is the beginning of the part that we are regulating. And once the process is complete, the fluid is transported off-site, and the gas begins to flow. However, in New York, it's not clear where the final disposal of the fluid will be. So you can see this is the fracking process that results in dangerous waste, which requires strict regulation. And now that I've shown you kind of the abstract of that process, I'd like to show you how this process looks on the ground. First, during the site development phase, which can last between 3 to 5 months, fracking typically starts in communities like this. Trees are cut and the land is cleared to prep the site for that well. In the drill prep phase, which can last between 1 to 2 months, large well rig towers like these are ultimately dismantled once the well has been drilled. In the fracking phase, which can last between 1 to 3 months, clusters of trucks pump the fluids through the well to frack the shale deep below. The wastewater that is pumped back to the surface is then collected in metal containers like these. They look like this from the outside, and this is a container from the inside. So operable hatches allow vacuum trailers like the ones in the background to pump the flowback fluid into the containers. They look like this when the waste is being pumped into them. And then the fluids are pumped through a maze of hoses and pipes, so it makes a very confusing work site. Ultimately, the waste is transported off-site in trucks like these. Now, there's a lot of equipment on a site. And I know a lot about equipment because, like the guy pictured here, I was once an Army mechanic. And dealing with fluids, diesel, transmission fluids, and things like this, equipment can sometimes break down and spills can occur, accidents can occur, leaks into the ground can occur. But on a fracking site, equipment can also leak wastewater and fracking chemicals. And in the process of pipe installation, operators can leak fluid into the ground. Also, as wastewater is disposed of, operators can come into physical contact with the fluids and be exposed to the chemicals themselves. Operators can also inhale exhaust fumes as they wait for the fluids to fill their trucks. And sometimes trucks carrying waste travel through communities like this. Narrow streets, heightening the danger of accidents occurring. During the final production phase, which can last between 20 to 40 years where gas is being produced, transport remains a persistent element in the process. Gas produced must be vacuum pumped into storage tanks in wheeled trucks like this. And then in the very final stage of development, multiple wells are rigged and prepped for future pipelines that have yet to be developed. So New York State was permitting drilling for natural gas through 2009, and this map of the Marcellus Shale from the Department of Environmental Conservation shows that the location of those well sites were directly adjacent to freshwater sources. And this is because operators favor shorter routes to water supplies, since roads in this part of New York are windy and small and transport costs are high. But after fracking fluid accidents in Pennsylvania and Ohio got the public's attention, former Governor Patterson implemented a moratorium on shale gas drilling in 2010. This was until more research could determine the complete environmental impact of this process. So this is why the bill requires a waste trucking program that regulates the transportation of waste from source to disposal, generates digital records that track treatment and delivery of the waste, provides accurate and clear documentation for public review, and gives the DEC oversight over these records so that everything can be clear and well reported. But the bill leaves a lot of vague points to be further studied. So our analysis during this simulation led us to create some protocols about how this program should be implemented. First, the storage duration of the waste should last no more than 30 days, which is current practice by operators to avoid high costs and accidents as well on site. Next, we created a system of reporting and auditing. In order to create paper documentation, the system will also include use of technology like barcodes and image scanners like the ones that UPS or FedEx use to track transport and shipments of waste. This system will be audited periodically, and all its data will be properly archived for review. Then we indicated scheduled and random annual inspections, which also requires that permit inspectors monitor compliance and conduct random inspections of waste conditions on site. Lastly, a system of incentives and penalties will encourage good compliance with efficient permit process, credits on site wastewater treatment, or discourage poor practices with fines for non-compliance, multiple offenses, and non-permitted operations. So, in general, we believe the goals of this program are to establish administrative capacity to regulate fracking waste, establish operational capacity to comply with regulatory structure, and incentivize industry practices to protect public and environmental health. We're doing this work because we're focused on providing the safest means possible for this fracking to occur in the most environmentally conscious way. So in summary, hydraulic fracturing waste must be tracked, managed, and treated in order to minimize risks. Next steps include an organizational and contracting plan to streamline administration and operations, a program budget that provides the resources DEC needs to achieve its program's goals, a performance management system to guide the policy and program execution, and lastly, a master calendar to coordinate the first year's outputs and goals. And with that, thank you very much, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Well done, Fernando. Very interesting. I have a question, though. It's more related to the science, I think. There's some studies published earlier this year in Nature and some other journals suggesting that methane leakage could be potentially as bad as coal and oil in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. I was wondering how your plan would deal with this.
I totally share your concern because I was also very interested in the construction methods of the well. And I know that although it's outside of our scope because we're only managing the waste that comes to the surface and then the process of transporting that waste. I believe that, on a personal note, the proper construction of the well so that it does not breach through aquifer bodies and other leakages to the surface would be super important, as well as making sure that the connection points at the surface don't excessively leak methane into the atmosphere.
Thanks, Doug. You gave a lot of good details on the tracking and movement of the wastes, but I didn't hear much about the treatment. You identified that as one of the important goals. How do you treat this waste safely?
Great. So I had the privilege of meeting some folks who are involved in this kind of process. Our bill, again, does not really indicate how the waste should be treated or even where it will be disposed. I think these are all regulations that are undergoing various